7 lines. 6 were written. The 7th was not. It was not blank by accident. It was preserved that way for 14 centuries. The page was not damaged. It was not torn, faded beyond reading, or missing a corner. 7 lines had been ruled by hand across the parchment, and the spacing between them was even, patient, careful, the kind of work a scribe does when the document is meant to last. 6 of those lines carried names. The 7th waited in the same measured space as the others. That was the first problem. A missing name can be an accident. A balanced empty line is harder to explain. The page came to light in 1907, in the Luxor antiquities trade, inside a small wooden box whose handling record began only after the page had already survived. The buyer was a European collector. He was not looking for the codex of 7 lines. He was looking for almost anything else. When the box was opened in London later that year, the seal was intact. The page was complete. The 7th line was not. No catalogue at the time described it as a mystery. It was only a page with 1 line left open. But the longer the measurements were studied, the less that line behaved like an omission. The 7th line was not missing. It was waiting. When the page was first studied, scholars looked for the obvious explanation. Maybe the scribe ran out of time. Maybe the page was set aside before the family could finish their entry. Maybe the 7th person had not yet been born when the codex was ruled. Each of these explanations made sense for a few hours. Then the measurements arrived. The 7 lines were not drawn in advance and abandoned mid-task. They had been spaced, balanced, and proportioned to the page as a single composition. The space above the 7th line matched the space below it. The line rule was the same hand-drawn weight as the other 6. The blank space had been planned for. Blank spaces usually disappear into a page. This one did the opposite. It organized the page around itself. The codex page behaved like a family record. 7 ruled spaces had been prepared. 6 had been filled. The 7th remained, not because someone forgot it, but because someone had decided, deliberately, to keep it open. This was not an empty space left by carelessness. It was a place kept open with care. And a blank by accident does not stay balanced for centuries. Late antique Coptic family records do not exist in isolation. Ownership of a house, a share of a field, the witnessing of a marriage, these moved through other documents, copied into other archives, named in other people's letters. If a family had 7 members, the count tended to surface in adjacent records even when their own page was lost. The first 6 names of the codex were not difficult to follow. They appeared in parallel records. They appeared in transactions. They appeared in copied fragments held in other archives. The numbers held, for a while. Then the numbers stopped agreeing with the ink. A property exchange listed 7 members of the household. A witness statement counted 7 recipients of an inheritance. A travel pass for the family group was issued for 7 persons. 6 names were written. 7 people were accounted for. The 7th name was nowhere. Not in their own codex. Not in any neighboring archive. Not in any deed, letter, or tax list of the period. The 7th person was traceable as a number. The 7th person was untraceable as a name. The family had 7 places. The archive only allowed 6 names. The codex of 7 lines was not preserved by accident. Each of the surviving copies carries the marks of a different century. The original ink darkens with one mineral profile. The 8th century preservation note carries another. The 14th century re-inking sits over the older marks like a second voice in the same room. The 19th century final entries are made with a modern pen on paper backing that did not exist when the page was first ruled. Hand after hand, the codex passed through generations of the same family, that much is consistent across the physical evidence. And across the later copies, the same small behavior appears. The hand reaches the sixth name. The ink darkens, deliberately, like a pause being recorded. Then the hand stops. Not at the end of the page. At the place where another person was supposed to speak. Later hands repaired the fading ink. They corrected the old lines. They protected the page. But none of them completed it. Every later hand repaired the 6 names. None touched the 7th. There is a way to read the codex that the page itself never explains. It is preserved in the behavior of the family, not in the ink. Once a year, on the same date, the codex was opened. 6 names were read aloud. When the reader reached the 7th line, they did not skip it. They did not say silence. They paused. And in that pause, the name of the living person holding the codex was understood to take the 7th place. The 7th name was not missing from the codex. It was supplied by the person reading it aloud. The line was not blank. It was waiting for the living. Children in the family did not inherit the 7th name. They inherited the pause. And when, 1 year later, the next reader opened the codex, the 7th name changed, not because the page changed, but because the person in front of it did. 6 names were fixed. The 7th was always the present moment. The line did not contain a name. But every reader treated it as if it did. The name was never written because it was never supposed to stay the same. Scholars who have examined the codex of 7 lines have divided, broadly, into 3 positions. None of them is dishonest. Each rests on the evidence in front of it. The safest answer is unfinished work. Late antique family records were not always completed. Pages were prepared, partially filled, and stored, sometimes for generations, in expectation of additions that never arrived. By this reading, the 7th line is a vacancy that simply outlived the people who would have used it. The second answer is intentional silence. Names were sometimes withheld, for protection, for inheritance reasons, for disputes the family preferred not to enter into the written record. By this reading, the 7th line is a deliberate omission, encoded as absence. The third position is harder to keep in a catalogue. It holds that the line was never meant to hold ink at all, that the document was designed to be completed by an act, not an entry, and that the act in question has no stable form on paper. The first reading explains the page. The second reading explains the family. The third reading explains the behavior. Both standard explanations work, until the codex is split in 2. In 1907, one portion of the archive passed through the Luxor antiquities trade and entered a London collection. In 1908, another portion passed through Cairo and entered a Munich collection. The 2 halves had been separated long before either purchase, and they did not arrive in the same year, in the same city, or through the same hands. 2 cities. 2 purchases. 2 archives. And in both halves, the 7th line is empty. The split was clean. The page had been divided along an old fold, and each half carries part of the original ruled grid. But the 7th line is not at the seam. It sits well inside one of the halves. The other half does not contain the 7th line at all. And yet, when the 2 halves are placed side by side, the empty position is precisely where any reader of the original would have expected it to be. The grid resumes across the gap as if the page had never been cut. The page was divided. The absence was not. Whoever separated the material did not separate the position of the 7th name. They knew where it was. They did not need to mark it. Someone separated the page without separating the absence. The last private use of the codex was recorded in 1973. The reader was an elderly member of the family that had carried the codex through more than 14 centuries. He is not named in the archival notes. He did not wish to be. Each year, on the same date, he opened a working copy of the codex. He read the 6 names aloud. He paused at the 7th line. And the children who sat with him did not inherit a name. They inherited a pause. When he died later that year, the pause lost its owner. The codex was not lost. It was not destroyed. The 2 halves remain in their archives in London and in Munich. Conservators have noted no further deterioration in either half. The 7th line is not erased. It is not damaged. It is simply no longer reached. He opened the codex one final time. He read the 6 names. He paused at the 7th line. And the next name was no longer known. The object survived. The act that completed it did not. The codex still has 7 lines. 6 can be read. The 7th can only be reached. And the last person who knew how to reach it is no longer in the room. Cross-reference. The codex of 7 lines remains in 2 halves, one in London, one in Munich. Conservators report no further deterioration. The 7th line, in both halves, is not erased. It is not damaged. It is ruled, spaced, balanced, and unwritten. The object survived. The act that completed it did not. Some files are not closed. They are simply set down at the line where the next name was supposed to be heard, but never was. End of file.